All right, well, welcome everyone very much to our museum midday. We're glad to have you here. And like you, we love going on field trips. So we're super excited to be able to have the Seward House Museum all the way over in Auburn, New York, share a little bit with us.
Thank you so much, Erica. Everyone in the room with you there in Alaska, and those who might be streaming from wherever. My name is Jeff Ludwig. I'm the Director of Education at the Seward House Museum here in Auburn. I'm joined today by three of my colleagues, also with the Education Department. Walker, who's working the camera. He can see the room, so if he sees questions or any kind of commotion, he can alert me to what's happening there. Also in Education, Kate Grindstaff. She will be taking over the middle portion of this presentation and discussing from her office with the slide deck William Seward's visit to Alaska in 1869. And last but certainly not least, we're going to go behind the scenes into collections to see some of the objects and artifacts that William Seward brought home from that time in Alaska. We can answer any burning questions you might have as we go through. We've also set aside time at the end of this virtual tour where all the staff members will be at their desks and can have a discussion with you and stay in our series of influence and hopefully give you the best answers to the questions you might have. I am standing now here at the front door, the other side of it. It's snowy and cold here at 33 South Street, the Seward House Museum in Auburn, New York. And you're in for a treat today. You're going to see the first floor. You're going to see the collection storage. But this house, and I've heard Erica say there are some people who are collections buffs in the room, has one of the finest collections for any historic house museum or really any museum in the United States. This home, built in 1816, was occupied continuously by generations of the Seward family, including our own William Henry Seward, from when it was built until 1951, when the last living grandson of William Seward turned the home and the collection over, more or less in their entirety, to become what you are going to see today. So it's a wonderfully authentic collection. We're going to take you through. My intention, my goal is to give you a virtual tour of the main spaces downstairs. I don't want to presume that anyone has a deep familiarity. I don't want to presume nobody knows anything about William Seward. To give you an accelerated version of a house tour and bring us up to speed and provide some context as to how and why William Henry Seward found himself in the room in March of 1867, negotiating for the purchase of what was then the Russian-American territory. So Walker, I'll ask you to follow me. We'll enter into the parlor of the house and we'll meet the family. I'm going to ask Walker, before I start talking, just to do a slow pan of the room. It's a lovely space, a decadent space. This parlor where we introduce our on-site visitors to the family, there's no better room for it. The parlor is the room where William Seward and his wife Frances introduced college visitors throughout the 19th century from 6 U.S. presidents, including John Quincy Adams, Civil War generals, movers and shakers in the women's rights movement, speaking of Kate Grindstaff, Martha Fulton Wright, Susan B. Anthony, and of course, radical abolitionist Harriet Tubman. The home was a stop on the Underground Railroad. Wi-Fi is not wonderfully good down there, but I would encourage you to go to our website, sewardhouse.org, learn more about us, subscribe to us on social media. We do post frequently, and especially around anniversaries, Seward's Day, Alaska Day, we try to tell this story in as much complexity as we can. Introducing then, William Henry Seward, you'll have to forgive me for not going into as much detail as we ordinarily would on his upbringing, on his family. We're going to keep the focus mostly on Mr. Seward so we can get to the Alaska purchase as quickly as possible. William Henry Seward, seen here about age 40, was born in May 1801 in what we would say downstate New York. We'd say that we were in upstate New York here in the Finger Lakes country. Auburn, if you don't know, checked on Google, is about 40 minutes to go west, Syracuse, New York. It's south of us, and Rochester, Buffalo are west of us. Beautiful country. Seward was born closer to New York City. His wealthy land, patrician, gentleman farmer. Seward stood about 5'3", 5'4" as a grown man. Little use behind the plow. And so at age 15, bright, precocious, and a troublemaker. His father was an enslaver in New York State, then a slave state still. At an early age, he picked fights. He questioned the validity of the institution. He was sent off to Union College in Schenectady, where at 15, he's actually initially admitted as a junior in college. He sails through academically. It still takes him the whole 4 years. Long story, but he was a little immature, and the college bumped him back pretty early on to sophomore status. Anyway, he graduates in 1820, 19 years old, with an undergraduate degree. In fact, in our house collections, we still have on display his 1820 college diploma. And he waltzes right in to a job at a Manhattan law firm. The sky really was the limit. He might have stayed east, made a fortune for himself, made a name career in law. But faithfully, when he was about 21 years old, he came home to the family farm. And I'll ask Walker to briefly show the portrait of Frances. Frances Miller, as she was then called. There she is. We call ourselves the Seward House Museum, but point of order, this was her. She grew up here. Her father built it. Seward just moved into it later in life. Frances was a well-educated Quaker young woman who rise into a radical career of her own right. When she was still a schoolgirl in Troy, New York, then called Troy Female Seminary, today the Emma School, she meets a young lady named Cornelia Seward. These two girls become close friends and mates. Cornelia, spoiler alert, William Henry's younger sister, and when Henry, as we call him around here, paid a visit to the family farm, Cornelia plays the matchmaker. These two were flown together, introduced, and soon leaving New York City behind. Erie in 1828. Comes to work for, he's a judge here, a lawyer, Elijah Miller, in his law practice, and within 2 years, the couple are married, and they move into this house. Though it's 5 from here. Fateful day, early in their marriage, when then President together to defeat in 1828 by Andrew Jackson, ushering in a whole new chaotic age of American politics. Seward is galvanized what's happened to the country. Formed the opposition, soon enough under the banner of the Whig Party. And in 1830, he'll leave Auburn behind, he'll leave the law behind, he won't leave Francis behind, but he'll be elected as a New York State senator. And for the next almost 40 years, he is actively involved in public life. From the state senate in his late 20s, a New York governor in his 30s, a U.S. senator in his 40s. As I briefly discussed, he was the front runner for the presidency in 1860 and will settle 2 terms as Abraham Lincoln Secretary of State. Later, in Johnson, which is, of course, he purchases Alaska. That is the quick version of our story. I'm going to get to the politics and really get into the politics of Alaska. If you'll remember me, Walker, and everybody there in Alaska, we're going to go right into the light. I'm going backwards. I practiced this. 2,000 books on the shelf that Walker's going to show you as he pans around. And he's found me. Hello. We're back with William Seward in his beloved library. We still have a desk here with stationery. These books, largely his fiction collection, contain his marginalia, underlining, scribblings. In a 40-year career, he and his wife, again, right, the live that want to be well informed as they wield power and reshape trade. Seward runs for governor of New York at 33, unsuccessfully, tries again at 37, and is elected in 1838. He'll serve 2 terms, where as a governor, young Seward develops a radical reputation as a anti-slave figure. He refused all requests, for example, to return a slave person from New York, now a free state, into the American South. He has enemies along the way, friends along the way, and he springboards from the governor's mansion to the U.S. Senate in 1840. Now, as I'm going to get into politics for Seward were anti-slavery. His wife, the abolitionist, would manage this house as a stop on the Underground Railroad. And Seward, this is his Senate-era portrait. What we saw in the library was his gubernatorial portrait. Emerges pretty quickly as a stalwart anti-slavery champion. He arrives in the Senate in 1849 in time to be one of the leading challengers to the so-called Compromise of 1850, which would include a Fugitive Slave Act. In one of his most famous and eloquent speeches, Seward condemns this, and he declares a higher law, even than the Constitution, and sets himself in motion for nearly a decade as one of the leading anti-slavery forces of his generation. What does that mean for you? What does that mean for Alaska? Well, as I'll get into, it meant that Seward was almost always quite critical of manifest destiny impulses because in his experience, manifest destiny tended to mean, yes, Western expansion, but along with it, the extension and deeper encroachment of slavery into the American Southwest. And he feared new colonies beyond that, the Caribbean, Central and South America could have been ripe for slavery if the South ascended throughout much of the 1850s had its way. So largely, Seward's critical. Not entirely, he advocates for Californian statehood. But when he thinks about expansion, this is important to remember, he's largely thinking, what does that mean? Excuse me, in terms of the growth and presence of slavery. Alaska, as we'll discuss, will come after, at least in his mind, that burning question has been settled, and he'll approach from a different standpoint. Well, we're going to ask you to lead us into the hallway. We're going to pause before the fireplace for just a moment. Long story short, at the end of the 1850s, William Henry Seward had emerged as perhaps the face of the anti-slavery Whig, and by the middle 1850s, new Northern-only anti-slavery Republican Party. He brought this radical reputation with him and a big household name as a strength and a weakness in running in a wide field of candidates, which included in the 1860 election a former Illinois Congressman, Abraham Lincoln, who runs to Seward's right on most issues, moderate on issues like immigration, moderate on issues like anti-slavery, stuns the country and stuns the world. I'm not going to get into the full story. When he upsets the great Seward, nearly a decade his senior, and a fixture in Washington high politics, and he will have to settle for a place by Lincoln's side. Before long, they set aside animosity. Some of you may be familiar with the book Team of Rivals. If not, get a copy. It's great. And Seward delivers for Lincoln great service and advice. Here we can see him leading the room. Boy, what's this? It's a first draft copy of the Emancipation Proclamation, which Lincoln and his cabinet are discussing here in 1862. If you look carefully, you'll see it is Seward, not Lincoln, leading the meeting. Both men would affix their signatures on the final document ending slavery in the rebelling territories on January 1st, 1863, and paving the way for the 13th Amendment. Did we ice skate over the Civil War? We did, because it's not quite why we're here today. I'm going to have Walker take us through the drawing room, give you a good look at that, and get into our dining room for us. And I'll have him do the same thing, give him a good panoramic sweep of the dining room. Eric, if you guys lose focus, we'll try to change position. If we lose Wi-Fi, but hopefully we'll be in good shape here. Is everybody still with us?
Yeah, we'll be sure to give you a shout if things get fuzzy.
Thank you, Walker. So here we find William Henry Seward in the 1860s at the end of the Civil War. Lincoln, improbably as late as September 1864, wins re-election that November, is inaugurated for a second time in March of 1865. And peace comes at last. Lee surrenders to Grant. We're not quite Juneteenth yet, but Lee surrenders to Grant on April 9th, 1865. And then horrors. John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater assassinates the president while in William Seward's Washington home. An accomplice of Booth steals into the domicile, gets in the Seward bedroom, and stabs him repeatedly in his bed. He's 63 years old by this point. It leaves him heavily scarred and a little bit enfeebled. He has a hard time using his right arm, a hard time moving around, but he does survive. He's bedridden for months. By the time he gets out of bed in the summer of 1865, the president is gone. Andrew Johnson now reigns over Washington during a time of Reconstruction, and Seward remains as his Secretary of State. And now, for the first time in his mid-60s, in the twilight of his career, Seward begins to see the world through a new lens. From his childhood, arguing with his father about the legitimacy of slavery, through his time as a champion of anti-slavery, positions as a governor, a radical voice for freedom in the 1850s, a candidate defeated because of his alleged radicalism in 1860. Now slavery ended with 10-stroke Emancipation Proclamation, and then written into our Constitution and enshrined by the 13th Amendment. Now, if we were going to keep talking about Seward and anti-slavery and its aftermath, we'd have a couple things to say about the 14th and the 15th. And we would be right to be critical of William Seward for absolving and abstaining from debates about the rights of freedmen and freedwomen entering the Union. But in some ways, this was a Seward unbound and unencumbered. And now, with Andrew Johnson embroiled in domestic politics and giving Seward carte blanche for his leadership and validity of the Johnson administration, he began to look at the world, this is his globe, 1840s German made, and began to think about it anew as a world builder, as someone with manifest destiny, expansionist designs, or as some would say, colonial, imperial designs. This last phase of Seward's life sees him pursuing all sorts of land ventures. He's interested in Hawaii, critics say Greenland, Iceland, Panama, Cuba, the Dominican Republic. Now, yes, Alaska is special, but in Seward's mind, it was one of many pre-Cold War dominoes that he would like to see fold and be drawn into the orbit of now a free American democracy. Seward is now thinking, I don't have to think about world expansion as a problem about perpetuating slavery. But what, of course, he's not thinking about is how imperialism and colonialism is written a different kind of blood. And it often means dispossession and dislocations of peoples. So as he's thinking about the world, I'm going to have Walker pan over to one of the many portraits in our house. This actually toured Alaska. And Erica was nice enough to show me a video of Emily Moore in 2017. In 2017, the 150th anniversary of the Alaska Purchase, this portrait was on loan to Alaska. And it traveled the state in Anchorage and Juneau and Fairbanks, and it was in the video. We see Seward in his State Department, pen in hand, globe looking a little familiar. It was a twin of that one. Charles Sumner is seen here, Seward's son Fred, Assistant Secretary of State. And the man over the globe was Baron Edward de Stoughton, Russia's minister to the United States. Now, Russia had, of course, been in possession, according to its own claims, of what they called Russian America. Though, as most of you in Alaska know, that mostly meant clustering around the island of Sitka since the late 18th century. They never densely populated this new world foothold for themselves, and by the 1860s, they were losing their grip and refocusing on the continent back home. The British were consolidating power in British North America, and many in Russia feared Alaska might fall in, or Russian America, might fall into the thrall of a British empire. It's the crowning age of imperial nation building. Seward actually had, during the Lincoln administration, had conversations with the Russian Archduke about whether this territorial acquisition, Russian America to the United States, might be feasible then. Russia was already testing the waters on selling. With the American Civil War in full swing, the Lincoln administration deferred and delayed. After the war, they revisit these conversations. Russia had been a stalwart ally, sent a fleet to help the Union cause. And as fast friends and upstart powers, they resume conversations in the early Johnson years. And they actually have a lot of footsie, a lot of back and forth and sort of dark cloakroom conversations, narrowing in on price and what's going to happen to things like fortifications and public buildings, until finally, de Sokol gets his orders from the Tsar, and he comes to Seward's home late in the evening on March 29th, 1867, ready to deal effectively with the Tsar's proxy and prepared to sell to the Americans and to Seward, who, of course, does not have this unilateral authority and is operating somewhat extra legally here to sell a territory twice the size of Texas. And the figure they will come to eventually, after much negotiation, is $7.2 million. A lot of controversy around that number, a lot of history around that number, and we can certainly get into it. Seward is ecstatic when de Sokol wakes upon him at home. He wakes up the clerks and translators you can see here. He wakes up Fred, and he and de Sokol race to his State Department, an orphanage until the Civil War era, get the gas lights burning, and they draft a 7-article treaty in about 4 hours of time. It will come down to price. They'll set latitude and longitude. They'll talk about public buildings, and Seward kicks in extra money for all the things that are come with it. Everything but, of course, the Russian Orthodox churches, which belong to the denomination still in Sikha, the church still there. And there is one article, Article 3, about the people already there. As for the Russians, Seward says, well, they can just remain or leave, become American citizens or leave. And there is a throwaway line or two about the Native Alaskans. I won't use the words they use. And the two men agree that rule will resume and be consistent and continue from Russian operations. No one asked Native Alaskans about this land deal, which was hardly Russia's to sell, hardly America's to buy. They weren't consulted, and many critics, though they didn't really understand the irony of it, called this a deal in the dark. Now, Seward announces the deal when the ink is basically still dry the next morning, and he is going to play a game of war for public opinion, going to try to win hearts and minds. Now, I know all of you in Alaska know that on the very next day, newspapers weren't blasting headlines like Seward's Folly. They did not do this. Overall reception was actually rather warm. Most papers crowed. Some critics sniped it with things like a worthless Iceland, a few acres of snow, walled Russia, Seward's polar bear garden. But most realized, as Seward tried to propagate, that there were great resources to be gained in Alaska: minerals, timbers, fishing, whaling, shipping lanes. And Seward was quick to send propaganda pamphlets all over Washington extolling the virtues of this place. But others question, in a time of Reconstruction, when the American South has to be rebuilt, when there are 4 million freed men and freed women who need to be folded into this country, how can this be a priority? To win votes in the Senate, because of course Seward does not have unilateral authority, and to win appropriations from the House in April of 1867. I'll ask Walker to show you this table. Seward is hosting night after night bull sessions, what we call here dining room diplomacy. 12, 14, 16-course meals with senators and their wives and congressmen. Seward is serving up, as some critics say, treaty, treaty, treaty. He has furs brought in, given away. He has the Smithsonian Institute and Civil War heroes endorsed for him. And he works the room again and again, though the misconception this was a folly, which Seward never uttered in his lifetime, to be overcome, is wrong. Most were willing enough to go along with this. It was largely popular. And when Sumner calls the vote from committee in the Senate, after this sweep of dining room diplomacy, The final vote is 37-2, overwhelming bipartisan consensus in an age of bitter polarization, much like our own, and on the eve of an impeachment of an unpopular American president. The deal is struck, the Senate ratifies the treaty, and Seward is exuberant. He tells everyone in Washington, and will for years after, that Alaska will be the thing he is best remembered for. And he believes it will put his name forever in the history books. He is so confident of this, and though he's disappointed not to pair the Alaska acquisition with any others, with Greenland, she goes after, or the West Indies, now the Virgin Islands, he thinks he's left his name on the history books. He's rewritten the map forever. And that is why, as my colleague Kate will tell you, the very first thing he does when he retires 2 years later is to pack up and summer in Alaska. I'm going to get to Kate now.
All right. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. So my name is Kate. I am the Education and Outreach Coordinator at the Seward House Museum. And I'm going to be bringing you guys some of the more visual aspects of this story. So again, as Jeff was prefacing, Seward took a trip very shortly after retirement to see the land that he had a major part in purchasing 2 years before. He had actually never seen this space before being a part of this purchase. So he goes to Alaska that summer. And the way that he gets there, because of course he is in Washington, D.C., he's in New York, he's on the East Coast. The way that he gets here is going on the Transcontinental Railroad, which he also had a heavy part in developing, building, advocating for. So much so, he put so much investment into the Transcontinental Railroad that he actually received one of the four golden rings that was made out of the golden spike for the railroad. So this was a very big deal. And he took this trip with some of his family members. He actually went all the way up to with his son, Fred, who was his Assistant Secretary of State, and again, part of that Alaska deal to Alaska. So just to quickly go over the Transcontinental Railroad, this was a huge, huge feat for the U.S. It was built between 1863 and 1869. 2,000 miles of track by two companies that met starting in California and Nebraska and then meeting in the middle. And that is Central Pacific and Union Pacific. And this drastically lowered the price of travel and, of course, quickened travel around the country. This was developing, railroads were developing all over the world at this time as well, which allowed Seward to then go and travel the entire the entire world. He actually circumnavigates the globe after he finishes his trip to Alaska, starting in Mexico. And that's in large part because of this. But yeah, so they get up to Alaska. This is Seward and his son Fred, and they travel via steamship, another major form of transportation that is being developed, again, making travel against waters a lot quicker, a lot more possible. So they go on the steamship, the Active, and both Henry Seward and his son Fred write about their experiences in great detail. They talk about what they see, the people they meet, the experiences they have. And they do this Henry does this in his autobiography. And then Fred writes in his own book, Reminiscences of a Wartime Statesman and Diplomat, where he talks about this 1869 trip. And he also goes back to visit Alaska and talks more about the changes he's seen over the years, about 30 years later, around the turn of the century. So this is one of his descriptions from that original trip. He says, they cruised along the California and Oregon coasts, explored Puget Sound with its great forest and busy mills and growing villages, were received with courteous hospitality at Victoria, and then passed through the magnificent scenery of the Inland Passage. All there was beautiful and lonely, not a vessel nor human habitat in sight, only an occasional canoe of an Indian fisherman. Cautiously proceeding through the waters as yet, but imperfectly known, we arrived at last in Sitka. So they go on to have some kind of culture shock moments. Alaska is a very different experience than life in Washington and New York. So some of their observations are recorded here. Again, William Henry Seward says it was rather a novel experience to have to draw the curtains to shut out the sunlight at 10 o'clock at night, and equally novel to find the sun rising at 2 in the morning. Bit less of an inconvenience, as Mr. Dodge remarked, than it was in winter to have to light candles at 2 in the afternoon. And Fred, describing Sitka, says, "The little town has been built by the Russians of square-hewn timbers, it being easier, as a townsman remarked, to square a log than get a board. A high stockade separated the town from the Indian huts and lodges just outside. A medley of population walked the streets, Russians in their national dress, United States soldiers in their blue uniforms, Indians in blankets and feathers, traders and travelers in the garb of San Francisco." So again, you're still seeing this huge cultural transition here. Because again, this is only 2 years after the purchase, so we're seeing all of these different cultures converging. Another quote from when Fred and Henry are in Sitka is a note again on the difference in time zones. So the bells of the Greek church were pealing a chime the next day for Sunday morning service, and a confused Seward inquired, "But is not this Saturday?" To which he was informed, yes, Saturday for Americans, but Sunday for Russians. We get our time from the east via New York, and they get theirs from the west via Siberia. So they're not even living in the same time zone here. So they visited a lot of different places on this trip. They met with a lot of different people. And luckily for them, at this point, photography, of course, had been invented years ago, and we actually can see from these stereoscope slides what they would have been viewing. So these slides would have been taken just about a year before they visited. So this really is the Alaska that they were viewing. And they mainly traveled along the Sitka, or they visited Sitka and then along the Chilkat River. And they met with the Chilkat, the Haidas, and the Tlingit natives. And these are some of those images. You can see a nice coastline. And then here is a picture of some of the Tlingit at Fort Tongass. Another big event that was happening actually on August 7th of 1869, and another big reason Henry Seward was really excited to go to Alaska at this time was the total solar eclipse. So this was a huge moment. We actually have a photograph here of that specific solar eclipse, and we celebrated this event this year when we had our past solar eclipse in this area. But this was a huge one for scientific advancement for the United States, because it allowed astronomers to refine theories of solar and lunar motion, and that would help improve navigation, the accuracy of navigation. And so there were lots of scientists that Henry and Fred were traveling with to capture these pictures. And they actually got to view it along with the Chilkat people. And it's a very interesting read when you look at their references to this event, how these different cultures, these different people were reacting to this event very differently. there was, again, to go off of more cultural differences, there were lots of misunderstandings, and there were also just flat out, there was disrespectful behavior, flat out, in these relationships. So, of course, the most famous of this is when William Henry Seward is meeting with Chief Ebbets, and he is gifted some presents, and he does not return the presents that would be the same level, thus recognizing Chief Ebbets' status as a leader. So his quote directly is, "Among the curiosities brought away from this place were one of 2 skins of the yellow bear and a bald-headed eagle who, having been wounded by a hunter, had been captured after a sturdy fight. He was a fine specimen of the emblematic bird whose portrait adorns the American arms and coins. And Seward carried him to San Francisco and from thence sent him to Auburn, where he lived for some years in a spacious enclosure." So these were some of the gifts that were given to him. However, he did not return that same level of gift back. So in response to that, the Tlingit put up a shame pole for Seward in the 1880s. Seemingly because of a cultural miscommunication. However, this, of course, has far deeper meanings. It really symbolizes his ignorance of Alaskan Native customs, respect, sovereignty. Again, we already kind of knew this because they were not involved in the discussions for the purchase of that land. And it really exemplifies as the strained relationship many people have with Seward's legacy and the purchase of Alaska. So you can see one of the iterations of this shame pole in that picture. I'm sure many of you have seen the one that is currently up. It was most recently renewed in 2017. Ironically, just around the same time that the new statue of Seward, a bronze statue, was placed in Juneau for the 150th anniversary of the purchase. So again, showing that difference in perspective on what Seward's legacy should be here. All right, and then I have one more commentary from Seward on what he observed before we move on to some of our other collections pieces. So this was his view on Frederick Sound. "The weather of this one broad climate of Alaska is severely criticized in outside circles for being too wet and too cold," Seward said. "Nevertheless, it must be a fastidious person who complains of climates in which the eagle delights to soar and the hummingbird does not disdain to flutter. It also must be confessed, at least, that it is an honest climate, for it makes no pretensions to constancy." And he says this on his address to the wonders of Alaska. So he did quite enjoy his trip to Alaska.
Okay, so my name is Emma. I am the Director of Collections and Exhibitions here at the Seward House. And we're going to give you a little behind the scenes look, not just because I'm in one of my collection storage rooms, but I've also pulled out some of our native Alaskan collection that is not currently on display. So you're getting a sneak peek of stuff that has been in storage for a little bit. Walker can do like a little panoramic here of what I have out, and I'll kind of point out certain things. Most of our native collection here is either Tlingit or Tsimshian. I had to look this up. I wanted to make sure that I pronounced that correctly. So we'll start at this end now. So we have this totem here with an eagle on top, and I believe this is supposed to be a bear with a fish. This is a battle, like an armor collar. So this would be worn around the neck. We have these 2 figurines, male and female. The female has a lovely braid going down her back, and the male is kneeling down. Then our collection record says this is either supposed to be a fish or a seal. So I guess we will leave that up for interpretation of, I would say seal, but you know, I also am biased. I just like mammals better. This is a rattle, which obviously would have been used for ceremonial purposes. This is in fact real human hair, but not the only instance of human hair in our collection here at the museum. We have Seward's own hair as well. We have this amazing ceremonial mask. You can see it even has all the ties still in the back. This is one of my favorite pieces, and this is the picture I sent along for your advertisements for this program. This would have been a battle helmet. It is carved to be a seal, so you can see where you would have put it on. So I imagine it'd be very intimidating to see that coming at you. This is a model of a kayak that you'd see at the Aleutian Islands. We actually have a full-size kayak from this region as well in our collection. That's too big to fit in our collection storage space. So you'll just picture this, but bigger. That's actually going to be an upcoming conservation project that I'm looking to take care of. Then we have this lovely totem here. This is a killer whale, and you can see there's also a carved face here on the dorsal fin. So we have, I mean, this is an incredible collection. Obviously, these are all things that Seward received as gifts, and we know that he didn't necessarily repay that gift the way he was supposed to. But, you know, these have just been an incredible part of our collection. And as you can see, you know, the paint is still pretty vibrant for being over 170 years old. And then we have these two pieces of armor. We have this wood one here where these slats of wood are all bound together. But this is my personal favorite. So the leather here is walrus skin, and these are Chinese coins. These coins are hundreds of years old. They would have been acquired by the native Alaskan tribes through trade with the Russians, fur trade and all that. And it's believed that they sewed them, they made these holes and they sewed them onto this vest, basically to be like an early bulletproof vest. Whether or not that was actually, you know, actually worked as a bulletproof vest, I can't attest to that. But, you know, once they started being introduced to guns, they said, you know, let's try to have a little bit of protection here. So these are some of my favorite artifacts from our Alaskan collection here at the Seward House. I'm going to hop onto my computer now at my desk, and we'll open it up for general questions.
Right, so thinking, hey, we did have that one question, whatever, and this came earlier, so thank you for those who submitted questions to be asked. Whatever became of the eagle that Seward brought back with him from Alaska?
And
Yes.
did I see David Rubin in the corner of one of those questions? I thought maybe I recognized him from his visit to Auburn in 2017. Am I right?
Yes.
Hi, David. It was great to see you. I was the tall guy. We did our program together in the church on the day of the statue unveiling. And your sister, great to see you both. I wish I could turn my camera on. I can't figure it out, but I know somebody there. How about that?
We've all been there with teams, so thank you so much, Jeff. But yeah, talk to me of the eagle, because I know that was
so we have pieces of the enclosure. It did make it safely back to Auburn, and that we do not have records of what happened to it after Seward's death. The family did maintain the enclosure. They put it in the barn, but Seward was notorious for his love for the bird. He named it Abraham, after Abraham Lincoln. And the servants were sort of bemused. Both mornings, Seward would go outside to see what the eagle was doing. And he would tell people to show him the bird. That was the exact language he used. He wanted to see the bird. So it meant a lot to him. And Kate had that quote from her speech, The Wonders of Alaska. Seward did stake his reputation to it. He came home predicting that Americans would share his admiration for the landscape. would be vacationing there, and he wanted to showcase these wonders that he brought back home, including the eagle. So he put it on display outside for neighbors to see. He was proud of these pieces, unaware, one gathers, of the error of cultural exchange. But the bird remained prominent in his life. His son inherited the house after him, and seemingly a little less eccentric in young children in his taste for pets. Seward had a lot of pets. He had a tame deer, very briefly, baby alligators. So the eagle kind of fit the menagerie style of Seward's love of animals and a love of Alaska. No record of what became of the eagle, as far as I know, after Seward's death in 1872.
Thank you. All right, and do you have some questions from the audience? I know we're creeping up on the top of the hour here. Do I have any from the audience? Jeff, can you talk to me about what is the best way for our audience and our community here to interact with you all out in the Auburn, out in the Seward House Museum, if they want more information or want to share things with you all?
If I knew what I was doing, I would say I'd put it in the chat, but I don't know how to do that for Teams. But if you go to our website, sewardhouse.org, there's a contact part, one of the tabs. You can visit, collections, education, volunteer here. One of those is our information and our contacts. You'll see Kate, myself, Emma, and Walker's names and emails. We would love to hear from you. If you want to engage with us online, you can send a Facebook message. We do, Walker sees them. We do post. We're going to be hosting Erica next month, close to Seward's Day. So you can find all of our contact information there. And I should say, maybe we should have had a disclaimer at the beginning. None of us would identify as historians of Alaska. Our interests in this are not exclusive to Seward, but we're most steeped in our Seward connection. So if we know less than I dare say we do, people in this room, about what happens next, it's because we focused a lot on this in 2017, and there's so many chapters of Seward's legacy. They're again needing water again. We would love to hear more information and your stories of Alaskan history. And does it align with Seward's vision? I don't know. But I am going to be quiet and drink this water.
Yeah, I know we're looking forward to the tour that Jeff mentioned. So this is kind of a fun exchange for us. They took us into their museum and their house museum, and back in March, coming up here, we as a community and we as the Totem Heritage Center and Ketchikan Museums will take their museum and their community on a tour of what we hold and the Totem Heritage Center. So if you all here sitting in the audience and saying, you know what, I think their community needs to know this story or know about this information, we'd welcome you all to share that with us so that they get an even more robust tour than they might otherwise. But yeah, I want to thank Jeff and all. If I don't see any, do you have a question, Marty?
Emma had more to share.
Oh, Emma, do you have more to share? We see you on camera there.
Was there a specific question about one of the collections items I showed?
We do have a question out in the audience. So let's,
Yeah.
talking loud, Tim, or do I hand you a mic?
My question is about the Seward poll. Are they going to do anything about the poll?
Oh, have there been
Are they
any
just gonna
conversations?
leave it as is and show that, there was customs here that were not honored? I've been told that the family came through here, so I don't know, would the government step in and make it right? Take the shame pole down and put it in the museum and, let the world know that even though we did in the past, not honor the traditions of the indigenous peoples, we're here to make it right now.
Oh. Good. She's got us. All right, Kate, did you hear the question?
Yes, I did. Yep. Yeah, so that's a really good question that I really don't know the answer to. I know that was in discussion with the family. I know it's also been in discussion that it's important to still keep that poll up as well, just to have that remembrance of that event. And people have a lot of different opinions on that. So I really don't know what the answer to that is, although that is correct. That has not been paid off in the last 150 years. But I'm not sure what will happen in the future with that. And I do think it is important that we do remember those original choices that Seward did make there and what that symbolized, no matter what happens in the future.
Right, thanks, Kate. I guess do you go to your collections?
I have an addition to that. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I was a part of the restoration of the totem pole park in Saxman, and that was one of the poles that we restored. So it actually cost money to restore the poles. You know, we were hired, and also when the new pole was commissioned or erected, the replicate pole was erected. The funding for the project comes from grants from the United States government. So essentially, the United States government is still paying for that breach in customs here. So we're still getting our, money's still coming here for that story, essentially.
That's a very interesting point. Yeah.
And we've got another one out. We want to mention we've got Dave Rubin. Do you want a question or?
Yeah, of course.
All right, here you go.
The same way that no matter what happens and how it's resolved, leaving the pole up would be good just to have it there as a remembrance of the history. Wouldn't you say likewise for the Seward statue?
Yes.
Yeah. In my personal opinion, yes.
Yeah, you're putting Kate on the spot there. Yeah, do you have another question or comment?
I have a question.
Okay, because we still have the collections. Yeah, do we have time for anybody?
We do have a question from somebody,
In the chat?
yeah, well, not in chat, but put my hand up, so I didn't know if you could.
Okay, yeah, I can, unmute it. Can you hold on to your question? We can go to the questions from the audience. Yeah, so Debbie, feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, so as a non-native tour guide this last year, in my quote unquote training, I was told that Seward actually visited Ketchikan here. So that's not true?
Did you know that Ketchikan wasn't included in the sale? Well, seriously,
It's wild.
the southern border for the Russian territories went right below Sitka. Did not include Ketchikan. You can look on a map online.
But we do have Emma's contact information, so if you're curious about some of what you saw here today, we'll definitely make certain that you have that information to reach out. But yeah, I realize it's like 5 o'clock. It's quitting time, your guys' time over in New York. So we'll go ahead and we'll let the Seward House Museum conclude, but please join me in thanking them for bringing their